So the dynamic decade, so really a lot of folks start moving into urban areas. What reason might you think people are moving into urban areas and out of rural areas during this? Okay, but why might they leave the rural farm to go to the urban sprawl? Not yet, we're not far from it though. Yeah, you've got higher income, you've got more job visibility. What's that? You've got easy access to goods, right? You've got smaller communities lack wealth, but they also lack something that you can get in the city. Opportunity, jobs, entertainment, amenities, running water, sewage, etc. So there's a lot going on here that would have pushed you toward the city. Keep in mind, remember that a big part of the growth of the urban era, or the era of urbanization, is due to the progressives, women like Jane Addams, who established the Hull House, women like Margaret Sanger, who were pushing for the establishment of the Children's Bureau, pushing for birth control, that actually ended up getting her locked up during the 1920s. The National Women's Party was all about women having the right to exercise their newly gained right to do what? Vote. Also women's right to get jobs, buy land, among other basic rights that they lacked at this time. There's also fundamentalist movements in this era. So you've got fundamentalist religious movements. And do you understand what that means? A fundamentalist sect of a religious group, that means they would like be very rigid, maybe literal interpretation of the religion, or like one group that really starts to get fired up during this era, and we'll talk more about them later, is we have the birth of the fundamentalist LDS, like the folks from the Church of Latter-day Saints that are like, we want to go back to our fundamentalist roots. So there's all types of fundamentalist movements during this era. Do keep in mind that this is like sort of like an era of nonconformity. A lot of people come out of World War I. We call them the Flaming Youth, or the Lost Generation. They're led by people like Langston Hughes and Ernest Hemingway, among others, who are sort of saying, you know what, we're going to do our own thing, we're going to live our own lives. We don't care if you don't like that we illegally drink during the Prohibition, or that the ladies are smoking and wearing the short dresses and have the bobbed hair. We're going to do what we want. Do keep in mind that this is also the era of Sigmund Freud. Talks about sexual repression as part of the responsibility for societal ills. This is the jazz era and the era of the flapper. Some famous jazz musicians that come out of the era. Yeah, W.C. Handy, Jelly Roll Morton, Duke Ellington, Joseph King Oliver. Jazz, bebop, blues, the birth of rhythm and blues. This is also the beginning of the birth of Black Pride. Langston Hughes in the Weary Blues becomes the voice of the Harlem Renaissance. Marcus Garvey becomes the founder of the United Negro Improvement Association, and really the inspiration for the Nation of Islam. And of course, we've already talked about the importance of W.B. Du Bois being one of the co-founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but he also becomes a major voice for equality for African Americans in education. Speaking of African American leaders and crusaders, Maggie Walker, first African American woman to run her own bank. I highly recommend you check her house out. It's down in Jackson Ward. It's now owned by the Parks Department, and it's an impressive historical location to check out. This is also the era where like the battles over the skyscrapers. I don't know if we talked about this before. I think Connor brought up something about the Chrysler Building in competition with the Empire State Building during this time. They're both finished like in the early 1930s or late 1920s. Empire State Building finished in 31. So here we have Langston Hughes on the left, Maggie Walker on the right. This is also a massive boom for American literature and the American literary culture as we know it. So a lot of these folks are really coming from various backgrounds with various experiences, not all well-educated Ivy League, Harvard, Yale graduates who are New Englanders. These folks are coming from all over the place. So cynic and satirist H.L. Mencken, who wrote for the Baltimore Sun, known as the Sage of Baltimore, the bad boy of Baltimore. F. Scott Fitzgerald, obviously the author of The Great Gatsby. Do I have any Gatsby fans in here? No one? Anybody kind of? No, not big on it. Dorothy Parker, member of the Algonquian Round Table. This was a literary group. Theodore Dreiser, we already talked about him. What is he? He's not only writing fiction, but he's also considered a what during this era? Muckraker. Very good. Nice work, Blake. He is a muckraker during this era. Hemingway, author of The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls. He's sort of like the voice of the lost generation. Sherwood Anderson wrote Winesburg, Ohio, describing small town life inspires our town. Sinclair Lewis is going to write Main Street and Babbitt. And this is going to give, group new actors roles coming up on Broadway during this era. I highly recommend any of William Faulkner's work, Soldier's Pay, The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying. Anybody in here ever read Horace Rimling? No, you should check that out. It's pretty incredible. I think you guys would enjoy it. Also keep in mind, any idea where most of Faulkner's stuff is held? His letters and... That's a good guess. It's actually not very far away. It's the University of Virginia. So if you're ever doing any research on Faulkner, you don't have to go far. Poetry was also innovative. Ezra Pound, Langston Hughes, T.S. Eliot. Eugene O'Neill, another playwright. Strange Interlude. Here we have F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby. And Ernest Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises. This is where we're going to wrap up for the lesson. So keep in mind that the presidents that had this return to normalcy, that followed the progressives, they are big-time laissez-faire presidents. They want to let business do business. And under both Harding and Coolidge, Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon is really going to push for mass production, reduction in taxes. A lot of people got hit real hard by World War I with taxes. So in this post-World War I era, we see massive sweeping tax cuts. But we also see, like when you overproduce, you end up with a what? Exactly. So we're going to find an issue where we deal with a bit of a surplus. It's interesting to think about when the Great Depression begins or when the stock market crash begins. It's really easy to think that October 29th, 1929 was the end-all be-all of this, but it really wasn't. It took time for all this to unfold. And it began like any other American panic or depression has started. And it was with the over-speculation of land. So when you over-speculate land and people buy it up and then they default on their loans, they pretty much, just hit check there. If they've defaulted on their loan, then they probably don't have what? Money and, is that what you said? You said money. They probably also don't have a what? A job, right? you're just not going to willy-nilly say, you know what, I'm going to default on my loan today. So if you start having people defaulting on loans, then things start unraveling. You start to realize that unemployment might be a problem. And then here is something that is really important. There's no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and there's no Security and Exchange Corporation. There's no one regulating banking, and there's certainly no one regulating Wall Street. So when all of this starts to unravel, it really begins in 1925. But by 1929, you've got a bigger mess on your hands because, number one, when the unemployment rate's ticking into the double digits, then, you know, you're moving into a recessionary to depressionary scenario. Another problem is if your banks aren't protected and then they fall apart, everybody's going to want to do what to those banks? What's that? Not rob them, but yeah, we call that a bank run. So they're going to want to run on the banks. And then when they run on the banks, then the banks don't have any liquid capital and they're forced to shut down. And then other problems start to emerge as well, like all the people that bought stocks on margin, right? Suddenly they're defaulting on those loans and somebody's got to hold the bag, right, of debt. So all those are sort of like the perfect ingredients for the recipe of depression. So when you think about the crash itself, I want you to remember that that's not like the end all be all. It's just a major event when the market crashed. The things that led up to it are extremely important, and the things that happened behind it after it occurred are also extremely important. So we have to look at the bigger picture. Like, one of the worst things that occurred following the market crash was that no one had any money, but the banks couldn't give anybody what? Loans, right? There was no availability of credit. So with frozen credit, everything ground to a halt. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at the business cycle. So we end here in lesson 8, but we kind of begin here in lesson 9, because this is going to be the onset of lesson 9 to talk about how it's just the beginning of a really difficult time in American history. Did you guys have any questions? Everybody good? All right, cool. So we are going to pump the brakes on the stock market crash of 1929, aka Black Tuesday.